Welcome, everybody. All of you have been muted. I just want to let you know that. You are, we are so happy to have you here today. Let me introduce myself. My name is Judy Mark, and I am the president of Disability Voices United. I'm also the parent of a 24-year-old son who is a self-determination participant. So pretty happy to have you all here. For those of you who've never joined us before, you are able to get all of our past SDP Connects. We probably have 30 or 40 of them. You're able to get them on our website called theinterchange.org, or you can go to disabilityvoicesunited.org and find them there as well. You'll be able to see links to all of this in the chat. Please don't forget, folks who are joining us, to select a language, go down to interpretations and select either English, Spanish, or Korean. So thank you everybody for joining us, and we're going to get started. Today, we are talking about the spending plan. And this is our fourth in the restart of our reboot of our SDP Connects. And you will be able to, as we present this, you'll be able to ask questions in one of two ways. You can ask questions by putting it in the chat, and Ed Herzl will be looking at the chat and taking note of all the questions, and when it is the correct time, she will ask me questions that came from the chat. You can also use the raise hand feature by going down to reactions, clicking on raise hand, and I'll call on you and I'll unmute you for that time. All right, lower my hand. So that's the way that we run SDP Connect. We always, every single time, get more questions than we're able to answer. So we will get to as many as we can, but we promise you that we will get to all of them, as many as we can. This, by the way, is the fourth in the series of looking at the self-determination program. We started with an overview of the self-determination program. Then we went to looking at person-centered planning for a couple of weeks. And then we talked for a couple of weeks about the individual budget and how you argue for unmet need. And then we are now getting into the spending plan, where we're going to talk about that for 2 weeks in a row. So today we're going to be in part 1 of the spending plan, and next week we'll be in part 2. We'll try to get as many of your questions answered as we can. If you have questions unrelated to what we're presenting today, you are also welcome to ask that. I know that I saw Rick Wood join us today. I'm going to make him a co-host. Actually, I can't do that. If you could do that, Ed, make Rick a co-host, because Rick Wood is the chair of the statewide self-determination advisory committee. And he is very, very helpful in answering a lot of the questions that you may have. So this is a pretty short presentation. I'm going to throw some of these slides to our wonderful staff, Molly Kennedy, who is going to help present with me as well. So let me start the slideshow and we will get started. Let me share the screen. And let me figure out which screen I'm sharing. That's it. Okay. Ed, are you seeing the right screen, or you're just seeing the slides? Excellent.
Perfect, Judy.
I always get afraid that I'm going to share like the wrong place. Okay. So let's get started. So this, as we said, is called How to Put Your Self-Determination Spending Plan Together. And this week, we're going to talk about the rules around it. And next week, we're going to actually go through how do you actually create it? What are the items? What are the elements of it that you need to make sure are part of your spending plan? All right. So first of all, a reminder of what this is, the spending plan. The spending plan is a plan that details incredible detail about how the money from your individual budget is going to be spent. And it is different than your individual budget. The individual budget is just a dollar amount. There doesn't have to be a relationship between how the dollars in the individual budget were set up and how the spending plan is spent. We hear people make this mistake all the time. We hear regional centers telling people, well, if what was in your individual budget was specifically for supported living or specifically for social skills, you have to relate or respite. You have to have a line drawing to doing those exact things in the self-determination program. That is not true. Okay, the spending plan is how you want to spend your money. The individual budget is just a budget amount, as you learned last week, based only on the traditional system. There doesn't have to be a relationship. Okay, somebody tells you something different, they are wrong. All right, so what leads to developing your spending plan? There's sort of 3 separate areas, and we're going to go through them all. The first one is your person-centered plan. Remember that in self-determination, your person-centered plan informs everything in your life. It is, and if you're interested in what a person-centered plan is, please go back into our video library and look at, we've talked about it many times over the past year. Person-centered plan is all about you. You direct it. It is your, and when I say you, I am talking to the person with disabilities, not talking to the mom like me. I'm not talking to the dad. I'm not talking to the brother and sister. I'm not talking about paid staff, the regional center service coordinator, or your lawyer. It is about you, okay? It then informs your IPP. The IPP is your individual program plan. It is that contract you have with your regional center that they are saying we will provide you with these funds and will help you with your goals. And then so remember, the person-centered plan is not the same thing as the IPP. They are completely separate documents. However, the person-centered plan informs your IPP. And if you are hearing something different, that they're one and the same, you should tell your regional center to look at the directive on person-centered planning from the state. The IPP then, the goals in your IPP inform the services, activities, and items that you put in your spending plan. So I'm going to now get into much more detail on this. All right, so let's talk a little bit about your person-centered plan. So specifically, your person-centered plan contains outcomes and goals that you want in your life that will and will not relate to your disability. So, so that's really important because we're gonna differentiate that from what your IPP is. Your person-centered plan will contain goals that cost money and some that don't cost money. Whereas the goals that are in your IPP generally do. You can look long-term in your person-centered plan. You can look at the next year, or you can say, what's my 5-year goal? What's my 10-year goal? There's no rule for how long you can look into the future. Finally, your person-centered plan covers only the subjects you want. So you can say at your person-centered plan, I don't want to talk about my weight, or I don't want to talk about the fact that you think I have poor behaviors. I want to talk only about positive things in my life. And so you can set the subject matters of your person-centered plan. And actually, this is the last one. It's only your decision about what goes in your person-centered plan. You are working with an independent facilitator, but you can put things in it that you want. And if there are subjects you don't want in your person-centered plan, it does not have to be in there. Now, what is your individual program plan as a difference? So it only will relate to the outcomes that are part of your disability. So I'm going to give you an example. So in my son's original, many years ago, person-centered plan, it had one of his goals is that he wanted to spend more time with his grandfather. So that has nothing to do with his disability. It has to do with him loving his grandpa. So really, it doesn't really matter that to a regional center that my son wants to spend more time with his grandfather, because that has nothing to do with his disability. So I want to make sure people understand that you shouldn't start your person-centered plan. You shouldn't start your spending plan with, I want to buy these items, I want to purchase these services, and then work backwards from that. Everything starts with your person-centered plan. Your IPP also will contain goals that cost money and require services. So they're not going to put wants to spend time with grandpa. They're not going to put I was just got an email from a woman whose goal in life is to travel to all 50 states. That is not a goal that's going to end up in a person-centered plan. All right. But it is a really important, not a person, I mean an IPP, but that is a really important goal to her. She wants to travel to all 50 states. Let's see what we can do to support that. So is she going to need to make money to be able to pay for it? Great. That's an employment goal then, right? So what goes in your IPP looks very, very different than your PCP. The IPP also, the individual program plan with your regional center, really only covers those goals for 1 year, because they will only commit to paying for things that happen in the next year. You then have to meet with your regional center and set up a new set of goals. Sometimes the goals will stay the same. Sometimes they'll change depending on whether you've accomplished those goals. It also, your IPP covers lots of things you don't want to talk about. If for all of you who've ever been to an IPP, one of the first things they ask for is, what's the medication that you're on? Have you had problems with your health? Have you had problems with behavior? How can we change you? I remember I sat in on a meeting recently with my regional center where they said, well, we have to put in the IPP what you want to be changed. It's like, well, what if I want nothing about me to be changed? Then why do I even have an IPP? So it's if any of you understand the difference between the medical model of disability, where it's people who want to fix you, correct you, change you, versus the social model of disability, where people want to accommodate you, accept you, provide support for you. The IPP is the medical model, which is the way the government needs to work, because they have to show you that you have all these problems that need to be fixed and we'll pay to fix them. And the social model is really more like the person-centered plan, which is all based on your strengths, your hopes, and your dreams. The IPP team also is required to include the regional center. Your person-centered planning team is not required to include the regional center. It is those people who you know and trust in your life. But the IPP team includes the regional center, which I would argue has an equal voice in your IPP, but unfortunately it has it has much more than an equal voice in your IPP, because they can deny you services in the traditional system, right? Lots of people have been denied services in the traditional system. So the IPP team includes the regional center and other people that you choose. The PCP can include your regional center, but is not required. So what is the spending plan? So I'm going to throw this over to Molly, and I'm going to just get it all up here so you can see what you're saying. So go ahead, Molly.
Okay, so the spending plan is going to be based on the amount of your individual budget. So what is the most important thing to come out of your individual budget is the total amount that you can spend in your spending plan. The services, activities, and items that you want to pay for in your service plan, in your spending plan, must relate to your IPP goal. So if you want to pay for a art class, but you have no goal that says, you know, I want to be social and I want to learn to paint, then it can't be funded. It has to relate to a goal. Now here is what is more kind of the government language that we have to address, but all the services and activities and items that you want to fund in your spending plan have to meet the government waiver. So California has a waiver with the Federal Department of Health and Human Services. And in that waiver is a list of services that I think we'll talk about in a bit, of what you can purchase in your spending plan. So let's say you have a van that you want to add a ramp to. So that's a modification and that's okay under the waiver. But what's not okay is to say, I want to buy a brand new van accessible. You can't buy a van or a car or a jet ski under this waiver. So it's gotta be part of the waiver in the list of the services. Before you start to budget out your spending plan, you need to look at the services you are needing to support you. And if any of the services are what we call generic resources, i.e. insurance, health insurance, what a school district will pay, what, you know, if you have IHSS, you need to use those services and be paid for with those services before you could, they can't be funded if they're funded by a generic service. And lastly, the services must meet the home and community-based service setting rules. And this is from, again, the Department of Medicare and Medicaid. And it's not too new, but it's not too old. It's been being set up to be implemented by 2023, but these rules, for instance, say that services must be integrated in the community for them to be funded. Judy?
Sorry, I was unable to unmute for some reason while I'm working this thing. Sorry, guys. Okay, so thank you. I'm going to just go back to that. Okay, so now we're going to drill down on each of these little bullet points. Okay, so waiver services. So Molly talked a bit about that. So a waiver is a silly word that I try not to use, but we kind of have to use it. So there's a list of services. You can find them on the DDS website. It's also in our book that we sell called Thinking Outside the Box. And you need to be able to be part of one of those services. It's 26 pages of services. So there's a whole lot in there. There's also some really general ones called community integration services and participant directed goods and services. So a lot of things people want to do end up in that list, I promise. But you'll realize as you look at the list of services that once again, these are services that are related to the person's disability. So it's different than, yay, I really want to travel to all 50 states and I want my travel expenses paid for. You're not going to see that in the list of services because that's not related to a person's disability. So it's really important for you to look at those services and realize that, you know, there's lots of things you can do, but it is not an unlimited amount of services. So what are services that are not going to be in the waiver and that are not covered, that regional centers are able to say, sorry, you cannot use you cannot purchase these kinds of services. So there is no exhaustive list yet. There will probably be a list coming out in the next few weeks or month. But here's what we know for sure you cannot pay for. Number one, you cannot pay for rent or mortgage. Okay, you just can't do that. Don't even try. It can't happen. You are supposed to be using your SSI check for that or private pay from if you're employed. You cannot buy food either. I know there's been some people who are asking for kind of these in-between food things where you take a cooking class that includes food, and that's been turned down by a regional center. So I would say that if you're squishy in the food area, you're entering sort of the border of what is intended. The purchase or the lease of cars or vans or vehicles and the general maintenance of cars, vans, and vehicles cannot be paid for through the self-determination program. However, what you can pay for is the modification of your cars or vans and any repairs related to the cars or vans that's related to your disability. So for example, if you need to put a wheelchair ramp in, that you can pay for, or if the wheelchair ramp breaks and it needs to be fixed, you can pay for that. So general home improvement not related to your disability is not going to be paid for. I know that some people have asked for things like swimming pools or you know, adding on an extra room in your house. I mean, those kind of general things are not going to be paid for. However, if it's related to your disability, like you need to expand a room because you are living on your own and you're having a staff live with you, or you are widening a doorway to get a wheelchair in, or putting bars in your shower. All of those home improvement parts are because of your disability, and you can definitely pay for that. There is possibly going to be more in the future of restrictions that will come down, not from your regional center, but from the state Department of Developmental Services. And that will likely relate to some recreational programs that you want to have that are unrelated to your disability. We're still advocating to keep those as broad as possible so that you're not restricted. But I'm not able to give you an answer yet because I haven't seen any documents yet with any final information. So Molly talked a little bit about generic resources. by the way, this is no different than the traditional system. Many of you have probably asked for services that the regional center would say, no, the school district is supposed to pay for this. Or you may have asked for supports at home and they say, well, you got to use your IHSS hours first. IHSS, by the way, stands for in-home supportive services. The other things are like the Department of Rehabilitation for some of your employment related expenses, and then therapies such as behavioral therapy or with speech therapy or occupational therapy. You need to request your insurance or Medi-Cal to pay for it first. Just like in the traditional system, if you get denied by your generic resource, that is when you can ask for, you can put it in your spending plan. All right. Generic resources are things most people are familiar with. The HCBS Settings Rule that Molly talked about. This is something that is for everyone. By March of 2023, in a year and less than a year and a half, or yeah, just about a year and a half, it's going to be required for all regional center consumers, where all of your services and supports must be provided in the community where you have full access to the community or in your home. And your home, by the way, must also provide full access to the community. What does community mean? It means that you spend the majority of your day with people who are not paid to be with you and with people who don't have developmental disabilities. So that means that those very segregated day and work programs are unlikely to be funded in the self-determination program. I forgot to mention that, yes, this is required for people in the traditional system by March of 2023, but because we're in the self-determination program and we have that new waiver, that new federal contract with the federal government, we have to start following these rules immediately, which is important because self-determination is all about inclusion, right? So what does this actually look like? So if you're in a segregated program, if you live in a segregated place, you're going to a group home. You live in a group home, right? You live in a group home. That is really different than being in the community where you live at home with your family, or you live in an apartment on your own with support. You get a choice of roommates or not even having a roommate at all. You have set meal times in these group homes or in places you live, and what you don't have choice of what you eat. In self-determination, you have to have a choice on what you eat and when you want to eat it. Group employment programs where people sit and sometimes make sub-minimum wage in giant warehouses, that's not allowed in self-determination. It will also not be allowed after 2023. And it will, but what does employment look like in self-determination? It looks like a job you have in the community with the same pay, called competitive integrated employment, or it looks like self-employment, or and you start your own business, okay? A group day program, which a lot of adults are in, those programs generally, if you don't have a choice of what you do each day, it's generally not going to be compliant with the self-determination program and the HCBS final rule. You have to choose where you go. You also have to be able to choose who supports you. So when you go to a group day program, you are just using the staff that they've hired. You have to be able to choose your own people. And then for people who go to summer camps, so it's not a summer camp just for people with developmental disabilities. It's a summer camp that's truly inclusive, and you can also pay for an aide to help you integrate into that summer camp. So these are just some examples. So this is Molly's favorite slide. So she's going to say this one.
Okay, so real quickly, when you're doing your spending plan, and this is more once it's all done, it will be reviewed by the regional center. They do not approve your spending plan. Judy will talk about what they do. I'm going to talk about what they don't do. They don't approve your spending plan. They do not approve what services and supports you put in your spending plan. So if you put like, I want to go to Y, the swim twice a week, they might say, no, you need to go here. And you say, nope, you get to decide. They do not approve how much you allocate to each of your services. That is up to you based on the supports and needs and the IPP goals that you have.
Thank you. All right, so let's say what they can do. They can ask you questions about the specific items in your spending plan to make sure that they are part of the waiver. So let's say you put in there a line item for a contractor to work on your home. They're allowed to say, well, what are they doing in your home? And you will have to be able to answer, oh, they're widening the doorway for my wheelchair. Okay, that's fine. But if this contractor is, basically adding a playroom for you, or putting in a swimming pool in your backyard, that they're allowed to say to you, that's not part of the waiver. Okay, and they will ask you to change your spending plan. They're also allowed to ask questions about whether you sought out funding from generic resources first. And so that may, just like in the traditional system, that may mean that you would have to present a letter from your insurance saying we deny you behavioral therapy. Or you may have to say, no, I know it's a behavioral agency that's providing this service, but they're not providing behavioral therapy. They're actually helping me get a job in the community. So you have to say what it is that they're doing and make sure that a generic resource shouldn't be asked for first. Remember that regional centers are the payers of last resort. They are allowed to ask questions about where you are receiving your services. So if it is in your home, it is definitely compliant. I have heard one regional center deny someone something, and because they said you're only using that in your home. Yeah, that's allowed. But they're also allowed to say, okay, you are going to this day program. You're spending money in a day program. How is that day program going to allow you access to the community? They can ask questions like, do you get to choose your staff? Do you get to be in the community anytime you want to? Do you have access to going to meals or restaurants or whatever you want to do every single day? I have to tell you that I have seen regional centers not ask these questions. And it actually is quite frustrating to me, where they've allowed people to spend in their spending plan things that are so restrictive. These settings are so segregated, and yet they're denying people things. I don't understand. They're denying people things that are completely legitimate expenses, and yet somebody who wants to use the traditional system in a very segregated program, they're saying is okay. So don't even get me started with that. And finally, they can ask you to, what they're not saying is we don't approve your spending plan. They can only ask you questions about very specific items in your spending plan and ask you, and if your answers are problematic, they can ask you to change your spending plan, okay? That item, not your whole spending plan, all right? All right, so that is our presentation. I'm going to stop sharing the screen. I'm going to, so once again, for you to ask questions, you can go to reactions at the bottom of your screen, choose the raise hand. You can also ask your questions in the chat, which I've seen some activity in the chat. And I will, Rick, Molly, and I will do our best to answer any questions. It does not have to be about the spending plan. So why don't we get started, Ed, with you, any questions that you see?
Absolutely. So I have an anonymous question first up. In the self-determination program, do we need to get authorized by regional center if we meet the direct service, if we need the direct service to my brother via ABA, or do we address as an unmet need in the spending plan and notify our FMS? What about regional centers approval? Who's the one who's going to make the final decision on this matter?
Okay, so I think there's a little bit of confusion between unmet need, which is related to the individual budget, and your spending plan. That don't mix those up, okay? So you argue for unmet need to increase the budget, which is a total dollar amount. So you can only ask for those items in the traditional system, for services that are provided in the traditional system. So let's say you should know that ABA therapy is only provided to people who don't have autism, because autism you're required to use your insurance. But let's say you're a person who has cerebral palsy who might need some behavioral therapy. You could request that, and that dollar amount for behavioral therapy goes into your budget. In no way does that mean you actually have to spend that money on behavioral therapy. However, you do have to address the goals in your IPP with how you spend the money. So let's say the regional center says, yes, we agree that there should be behavioral therapy provided for this individual because maybe they have a lot of anxiety, or maybe they have concerns about being in the community, or safety concerns, or whatever, right? And so they say, we authorize, let's say 10 hours a week of behavioral therapy, and which equals in a year, let's say $10,000. These are generic numbers here. That $10,000 of services is tied to a behavioral goal in your IPP. It's not tied to, something generically out there. So when you go into your spending plan, you may decide, I don't want to have behavioral therapy. I'd rather have horseback riding. I'd rather have meditation. I'd rather have a personal trainer and exercise. I'd rather do yoga. And you have to say that all of those expenses in your spending plan tie back to the goal in your IPP that talks about behavior. That's really important. People need to understand that. If you can do that successfully, you will stop having problems with your regional center. And well, I cannot promise anybody you will stop having problems with your regional center. But what I can say is that you have a much better argument to go to DDS or to go to fair hearing if you are tying every one of your expenses to a goal in your IPP. And remember that the goals in your IPP only relate to your disability. They don't relate to generally the goals in the world. All right. I don't know if Rick, if you want to add anything to that question.
Yeah, thanks, Judy. This is a really important point, and I think that Judy articulated something that I didn't think was clear in one of the slides, and that is that this IPP is really important. And I know those of you who have been in the system for a long time receive a call. Well, these days a call, it used to be in person, or maybe a Zoom meeting in which the case manager or a service coordinator is simply walking through boxes that have previously been checked, and to see whether they are still relevant or whether there are new things. And sometimes I don't think enough attention is paid to that, because Judy's point is this: the PCP goals are often much broader than the IPP goals. And those that don't relate to the goals that are in the IPP, the outcomes that you're trying to achieve, are not going to be funded. And so your PCP can go for pages and pages and pages, and all of it could either be generic or not related to your disability. They just relate to life. I thought, Judy, your example was really good, which is somebody wanted to, as a goal, visit all 50 states. Well, that's a goal that can't be funded. However, if you are creative in the way that you approach the implementation of the goal, you may get funded for things that relate to ultimately that outcome. So pay attention to that IPP, be engaged with the service coordinator when that IPP comes around. I just had an IPP for my adult son, and it could have been a very pro forma exercise, because we've been doing it for years and years and years. And the other thing I'll say about the IPP is they only seem to look back a year. So they want to know what happened this past year in looking forward for only 1 year. And a person-centered plan, of course, is something that can go out a much longer way. So my comment is it's an important exercise to go through that IPP. It's necessary because in order to have funding for things that are within the various categories in the waiver, the activity or the service that's being requested has to relate to a goal that is in the IPP, which is a goal that relates to your disability.
Thanks, Rick. So I'm going to call on Susan Eustaris. Hi, Susan. Go ahead and ask a question. Susan, are you there?
Yeah.
You go.
Hi. Hi, Judy.
Hi.
So my question is, I don't know if you're familiar with the Drake Institute, the Brain Balance Institute. I inquired about it for my son, Louis, and they said that they don't take any kind of insurance. So I figured I was just since he doesn't have ABA anymore, doesn't have any behavioral therapy at all. I was just going to introduce it as an unmet need. Can I do that?
So it's different. It's not really, you can't say that a specific service that you want is from a specific service provider is the unmet need. The unmet need is really more like he still has challenging behaviors. That is an unmet need.
Right.
And you would just, so because, I mean, I don't know, Susan, if you've asked for insurance to pay for
They don't.
it.
They don't take insurance. They only take.
I know this particular agency doesn't take insurance, but does the insurance generally pay for behavior therapy? Like
for only ABA and floor time, but they don't pay for that brain balancing or Drake Institute.
Right.
No, they don't.
So because the regional center in the traditional system does not pay for that, it's going to be more of a challenge for you to argue for it. It doesn't mean that you can't, and I'm not saying you shouldn't try, but I am saying that it's going to be it's going to be a challenge, Susan. So
okay.
I would say, some insurances, by the way, do not pay for behavioral therapy for adults. So one of the ways you could look at is, what is the insurance right now? Would they approve a certain amount of behavioral health, they call it? How much would that be? And then see if because if they turn your son down, then you can ask for that as unmet need. All right. So you definitely have to ask insurance first.
Okay. Oh, okay. Got it.
Yeah.
Okay. Thank you.
All right.
Judy.
Thanks, Susan.
Okay.
Okay, next one in the chat, Ed.
Absolutely. So here is our next question we have from Miriam. I am my son's conservator. He will vote for the first time by mail. How does he sign the envelope? Do I sign as his conservator, or does he sign and I sign as a witness?
Oh my God, how awesome that we have a question about voting, people. We are thrilled. In fact, we are likely, DBU, to do a quick little webinar or something like this to make sure people know about the election that is coming, that is very, very soon. But so you as a conservator do not need to sign the form. The voter themselves needs to sign it. You'll see on your voting form that it says if the individual cannot sign, they can make a mark. A mark can be just an X. So that individual has, so even conserved individuals retain the right to vote. So therefore, conservatorship is irrelevant when it comes to voting because that individual still has that right to vote. So I'm so glad to hear that your child is going to be voting in the election. And by the way, everybody, make sure you're all voting. There's a very, very important election coming up about the recall of Governor Newsom. There's a lot of issues that we in the disability community care about. And we have to think about which, if Governor Newsom or if he is recalled, a different candidate might be important and do the things that we want them to do for our community. So I hope that helped. Dr. Henney, go ahead and ask your question.
Thank you. It's so much easier to just read it out loud. So I will do it Dr. Laura style first. What's the question? And then go back to the history, which is a very autistic way to write. So my question is, why should I pay for my disability accommodations to be supplemented in my home because the regional center and the FMS refuse to liaise with each other to make the process of self-determination accessible to me, and they have systematically denied it, implied it, and also denied it. So this is a civil rights matter because under the Lanterman Act, and I confirmed this with the DDS, I had a meeting with the executive board. I said, I want to know, with the Lanterman Act, mandates that the regional center provide ADA accommodations to the consumers. And that means that they have to fund interpreters. It means that they have to fund a team of psychologists to help a service coordinator understand a consumer better. It means that they have to make use of their internal resources to make sure the disability accommodations are met so that we can communicate with each other effectively. That's part of person-centeredness. So if I am hearing and visual impaired and I request an accommodation and the regional center denies it or just pretends I never asked for it, then they're not making it accessible to me to be able to access these supports. And the same thing with self-determination. Self-determination doesn't purge you from regional center. You still have your service coordinator. So why shouldn't the service coordinator step into the role to make accessible for me to learn self-determination? So I turned to the FMS and I said, well, you guys have to, you're under contract with the regional center, you're getting paid out of the budget. You too, I guess, are under the Lanterman Act and you have to apply ADA. You have to make this process accessible to me. And that already now it's 2 months. And today I want to say that the first provider got a paper check in the mail today for July. And I was the first consumer in the state to move into the soft rollout for July 1st. And this is a real transgression that on the 25th of August, now we're saying, oh, the first provider. So what happened to me in July was providers were quitting. I had a provider break and enter my property and threaten me physically and then slander me on the internet because they did not understand the program, and neither did I. And we jumped into hiring providers before the FMS even knew what hit them. And it turned into a major issue. And you asked us on June 9th, Judy, you asked us to submit a 4731 complaint. I submitted it. It's 3 months, yeah, almost. Not a single response. I don't even know who is in charge of civil rights complaints with under the Land Termination Act. So this is my bigger question.
Yeah.
Why should I pay for an independent facilitator to facilitate my independent transition to self-determination when the need for the facilitation is because of my disability?
Yeah.
So why should I pay for it out of my budget?
That was just a brilliant question. It is a brilliant question. And it is, and I need to just expand on it because Henny is a person with a disability served by a regional center, but there are family members who also need this similar accommodations. There are people who need language accommodations. There are people who, and I can tell you that this process can, particularly by the regional centers and some FMSs, make it so complicated. I don't know if any of you have seen the reports. You're supposed to be getting monthly reports from your FMS if you're already in the program. And in some cases, they're almost impossible to understand. They're incorrect. And this is really wrong. Rick, I don't know, this is probably something that Rick and I should bring up. We're part of a statewide sort of work group on the self-determination program. And it is so true, Henny, that the fact that they make it so complicated is really against people's ADA accommodations. So thank you for bringing this up. I can tell you that the 4731 complaints are in the Land Termination Act, and DDS should have responded to you. Number one. Number two, if you have concerns about your FMS, I really recommend folks to shop around, because you have a choice of FMSs, and see if there's another FMS that may be more responsive to your needs. So yeah, the other thing I also wanted to mention is that part of this, the budget that was passed on July 1st for the state of California includes funding for a ombudsperson. So an ombudsperson is a person who's supposed to help, to hear complaints from people like Henny and help navigate the system for her, to inform the regional centers what their rights are, to inform DDS about these concerns. So I think that once we get this ombudsperson up and going, I'm hopeful that things will actually start to improve. And I can tell you that I believe it's next week, DDS is having their first meeting about the ombudsperson and the type of person that should be hired. So we're hoping it moves along. I don't know, Rick, if you want to add.
Well, it's a huge question, and it really goes back to an examination. First of all, identification and examination of barriers to self-determination. And we've identified those, that is the statewide Self-Determination Advisory Committee, and we're now moving toward and into a process to not identify barriers any longer, although this picture is so big as it has been described, that this is really, really interesting. We're moving into a best practices mode, which is to share information that will be shared, and we hope to disseminated by local advisory committees. But the thing that I was thinking about as this problem was sort of unfolding is that if you can't understand, if no one's educated or trained enough to be able to tell someone with a disability, to inform someone, to educate someone, and then to help somebody get into the program, then the person isn't going to get into the program. And so this is it's almost a cart and horse problem. Which comes first, the chicken and egg? The only thing that I can say to add to what Judy has said is that Judy, I can't remember how many specialists are going to be hired under the new legislation.
60
Right.
around the state.
Right, I was thinking it was 68. So
Mhm.
60 people around the state are going to be tasked with assisting in implementing the self-determination program. I hope this helps because what we now have is systemic inconsistency. Some regional centers do it better. They all do it differently from one another. And I just see this as almost as it's been described today, an overarching barrier that is important for us to take a look at. So, obviously I don't have the answer to that, but I appreciate the question because it, I think, frames it in this sort of larger context than just identifying a very specific barrier about something that we hear about anecdotally.
Thanks, Rick. I've seen that a lot of people have been asking how they find out a list of FMSs. I put into the chat the link. You'll see based on your regional center that some regional centers have a lot of choices and some regional centers have few choices. You'll notice also in the list that it talks about the type of FMS services they provide. We haven't gotten to that yet in our training, but that there are 3 types of FMSs. And you want to make sure that your regional center gives you lots of opportunities of choice. So I can tell you that, whether you choose generally the sole employer or the co-employer model, and we'll get to what that means, in some regional centers, you may only have 1 or 2 choices of FMSs who offer a particular model, and that's not appropriate. The self-determination law specifically says that participants should have a choice of FMSs, and 2 is not a choice. And so, and some of these, by the way, on this list, I know for sure are not even taking new clients. Like 24-hour care and some others, I haven't heard recently that they're taking clients. So, anyway, you should certainly appeal to your regional center because every one of the FMSs should work at every one of the regional centers that they want to work at. And I can promise you some of them have been pushed off. All right, let's go to another question from the chat, Ed.
Certainly. So next question from the chat I have is from Christina. I have a question for Judy and Molly. Can we add in our spending plan funding for an inclusion facilitator whose job would be to modify curriculum at a community college? Right now, community colleges only provide accommodations such as more time taking an exam, recording a class, etc. They also will say a support person can attend with a student if they need support, but the community colleges do not modify curriculum being taught. Wondering if this could be covered by someone whose job it would be to modify the class so that the student/SDP participant can be an active member of the class and learn the way that they do best.
Yeah, yes, for sure, you can do that. You cannot hire a person to modify curriculum in K through 12 because that is the responsibility of the school district. But when it comes to colleges, yes, you absolutely can. That's not a problem. There are certain things that you cannot pay for. I should have had the list. You cannot pay for tuition for college, but you definitely can pay for tutoring, for modification of your curriculum, somebody to take your notes for you, somebody to drive you to school, somebody to help you with any kind of daily activity needs while you're at college. So I don't know, Molly, if you want to add anything to that.
No. They can't pay for like any classes whatsoever.
No, you cannot pay for tuition. Okay.
Okay.
So tuition is very different than an art class, like one art class,
okay,
or an exercise class or something that you're taking at a community college.
okay.
You can do that, but you cannot pay for tuition as you are trying to get a degree at a college. Okay.
Got it.
Because the reason is, you know, is there's generic resources for that. If you are low income, you should be able to access, you know, grants, federal, state, local grants. By the way, community college tuition is free in the state of California for people of income. So nobody should have to worry about any of that stuff. Free is good in the self-determination program. Means you don't have to spend that money. Okay, Naveed, go ahead and ask your question.
Yes, thank you very much, Judy and Moni. I am a participant of Abilities United, and I'm also a participant of San Andreas Regional Center. I have two questions. First, I was wondering, these meetings that we have, right? I wanted to know, instead of, because we have 4 meetings, is it possible if we meet with our San Andreas coordinator 2 times a year instead of 4 times a year? That's my first question. And my second question is that I want my IAS, which is Independent Living Skills instructor, help me to teach me how to, where I have a pool, I'm living at a complex which has a pool, but I want to get better at swimming. But when I talk to the IAS and the manager says the IAS cannot teach the client because there is no lifeguard. I was wondering if could on the ICP, on the IPP, on the IPP, if someone wanted that for, let's say, for a IAS service, IAS provider to teach a person swimming, can they do that? Because, like I said before, I talked to the manager and the manager says not unless if there's a lifeguard on duty. And
Thank you, Naveed. So I'm going to take the second question first because my mind is, I'm losing my mind and I'm forgetting what your first question was. So let me take your second question first. There is no such thing in the self-determination program as an ILS provider. In the traditional system, there are ILS providers, and in self-determination, you have a goal that you want to learn to swim and be safe in a pool, and you can hire whoever you want to teach you. And they're not called an ILS provider. They're called your swim teacher or your swim instructor. So it's how you want to call them. And that, by the way, is a really great goal to have in your IPP, is to be safe in a pool. That is really, really important. So no one can tell you who you can hire to do that. That was something Molly was clear about. They cannot tell you how you're spending your money and who you're paying for it, unless, by the way, I should say, unless you're asking for nursing services or something where someone needs to have a specific level of qualification. But that is not the case for swimming. So now, Rick, are you not losing your mind? And do you remember Naveed's first question that you can answer?
I remember it.
Oh, good. Go ahead, Molly. Yay.
He asked if you have to meet with your coordinator 4 times a year.
Oh, okay, the quarterlies, okay.
And I think if you're in self-determination, you can meet whenever you want, or you can meet, you do have to meet at least once a year
No.
to redo your plan. But I don't know if you have to meet quarterly,
You
do
do.
you?
You
You
do have to
do.
meet quarterly. At least that's what I've heard initially. And I don't, Rick, I'd be interested in hearing if the regional center meets with your son. He's been in self-determination for over 20 years. But I can tell you that what I've heard since July 1st is that you are still required to have quarterly meetings because it's part of the Lanterman Act. And you need to, and it's just about people who live outside of their family home. But what have you heard, Rick?
Oh, I haven't heard and have not experienced it. We do not meet quarterly. We meet once, and that is at the time that we do the IPP. We don't need the regional center to meet with us in order for us to complete or renew our person-centered plan. We can invite them, but we don't see a need for them because they're not part of our son's circle of support. But we do meet once a year and only once a year. And that's been the case, Judy, for the 21 years that we've been in self-determination. So that's a surprise to me. I didn't know that. It's just another new fact.
Yeah,
Now,
I know that.
I am meeting quarterly, but I like it to check in. Usually we have to fudge with
So guys,
spending plan, but yeah, I don't know if it's a regulation.
Yeah.
what my question was, not because where for the first question was that because we meet 4 times a year usually, one for the quarterly, the second for your semi and 3 times, one for your quarterly, 2 for your semi-annual, and then 1 for your annual. I was wondering if it's possible, instead of the 3 times a year, if we meet only, let's say, once a year or twice a year, instead of the quarterly, semi-annual, and monthly.
So I'm not sure which meetings you're talking about at San Andreas Regional Center. Here's what I can say is that in the Lanterman Act, I'm not saying that these quarterly meetings are a good idea, everybody. But in the Lanterman Act, it specifically says that there, so are you talking, Naveed, about the health and safety check?
No,
That-
I'm talking about because I'm a participant of San Andreas Regional Center. I'm talking about that because when we meet with our service coordinator is 3 times a year. Is 1 for your quarterly meeting, which is 3 months. A semi-annual meeting, which is 6 months. And an annual meeting, which is 1 month. I'm saying that if we meet, instead of having all 3 meetings, have only 2 meetings at.
Yeah, so Naveed, I'm not sure about the answer to that. And that's something that you should definitely request to your regional center. It sounds like you're having a lot of meetings with your regional center.
Yeah.
The quarterly meetings I was talking about are not the same as semi-annual meetings or annual meetings. They're
So
what's called,
I don't mean to be rude.
no, you're not at all. So what I would say is that you should you should talk to your regional center and say, I don't want to have all these meetings with you. Can we figure out something that's less meetings? What I will tell everybody is that these quarterly meetings are not supposed to be about your goals or your hopes or your dreams. These quarterly meetings are only health and safety checks. They are supposed to be in person, not, let's get rid of COVID, forget about COVID. They're supposed to be in person. So the regional center service coordinator has their eyes on an individual who is not living with their family to make sure that they are being cared for. I can tell you, I know of a story of a regional center who would go in and check on a consumer who was getting physically abused by her provider. And every time the quarterly check came in from the regional center, the provider was sitting there threatening and saying, don't say anything. And this went on for 2 years until the regional center is supposed to be meeting with the individual privately or with a family member supporting them as opposed to a paid staff supporting them. The paid staff, in fact, are not supposed to be anywhere near that individual, so they can express any concern.
One more comment.
Yes, real quick, Naveed, so we can get to another question.
So where don't I have all these services that, for example, I as individual learning, that when I see my authorized to pay services, there's a, you know how that San Andreas each month sends a bill, not the regional centers, they send a bill, it's a pink sheet, right? Right? My question is this: I have these services back to the swimming services. My question is would that pertain to an IPP goal or a PP or a
person-centered planning goal? I would say it would be both.
Yeah.
I would say it would be both, for sure. It's a great goal, a really critical goal, actually.
So should I talk to my service coordinator about PCP?
You should talk to your service coordinator and tell that person that you want to be in the self-determination program and start and hire, or you want to find a good independent facilitator who understands the program, who's going to help you move forward in it. And you also want to make sure that you go through the orientation soon, so you'll understand things more.
Hold on. What is the difference? What is PCP?
PCP is your person-centered plan. So Naveed, I'm going to move on to another question because we covered the person-centered plan for a couple of weeks, and now we're really talking about the spending plan. I really encourage you.
Sorry, I'm new.
Yes, I know. I encourage you to look on our website. Ed, if you wouldn't mind throwing in the chat the link again to look through our past STP Connects. Rick, did you want to add something?
Yeah, it really raises what I think people ought to be aware of. And I'm looking in the chat at all these comments about not having meetings or having meetings. Here's self-determination is supposed to be flexible, everybody. If you have a service coordinator who's engaged, who can help you, who's productive, who's involved, you ought to have a relationship with that service coordinator because they are there to help and they can. If you have one, and many do, who don't understand self-determination or don't care, or who are burned out, or you don't get along with, then perhaps meetings are not going to be productive. And so you get to decide that. So as Judy said, these meetings that are scheduled are check-in meetings. They're health and safety check-ins. To make sure that, the person hasn't been just sort of, hasn't slipped through the cracks. And they play an important role. But I really encourage people who are in the program to have or to take the opportunity to develop a relationship with their service coordinators so that they know who you are. And trust me, it's going to pay dividends at your renewal time as things change, as you need different things, as you wish to direct services or your money toward different services. And also when unmet needs arise, it's just easier if you've developed the relationships. Not that it's a burden, it just becomes easier. And if you have somebody that isn't going to be very helpful, maybe you ought to ask for somebody else.
Thank you. Ed, what else is in the chat? I hear Rick said there's a ton in the chat. I want to mention, I've seen some people send me private messages. Very hard for me to read private messages while also running this STP Connect. So if you have a specific question that you want answered, please just put it generally in the chat. Or if you want to send a private message to Ed, you're welcome to do that.
Okay, Judy, I have a question that is anonymous. Is it wise to start the self-determination program with a limited budget? The regional center wants us to jump in and we'll continue to look at our other requests. I am concerned that our spending plan will be limited as we are just starting with personal assistance.
I think it's a good idea to start the self-determination program, even with a limited budget, if it's enough money for you to be able to hire people that you want to support you or to engage in the activities that you want. And then you can continue to fight for your unmet need through the system. So, I think it's really up to you. Some people have budgets that are so incredibly small that you can barely even pay for your FMS. So in that case, obviously that's a problem. But if you have a budget that at least covers your FMS costs and to be able to hire somebody or to do the activities, some activities you want, then if it were me, I would go in.
Thank you, Judy. Our next question is also anonymous. Is the regional center allowed to review our service provider vendor to add them to the spending plan and ask details about what they are doing? Also, if we add a service provider vendor to the same category, like, for example, community integration support, where we receive services already from other vendors, should the new vendor be added to the signed spending plan while we haven't changed the amount of money for that specific category?
I'm not 100% sure I understand the second question. First question was, can regional centers ask you about what the vendor's going to do? Yes, they can, but only in the context of those things we talked about in the presentation. So is it a generic resource? So let's say you're hiring, and remember, they're not vendors. They do not need to be a vendor. They're just a service provider. And you shouldn't only be looking at the traditional vendors. My son has traditional vendors and non-traditional vendors. He has traditional vendors in the regional center system, and he also has general service providers that are community-based folks. So, I'll give you an example of where they can ask a question. So my son uses a traditional vendor who runs group day programs that would not be considered integrated in the community, but we're not using them for a day program. We're using one of their coaches to come and do personal training exercise with my son. That is, so my regional center had a legitimate question. You're using this provider. We know they provide segregated programs. What is that provider doing for you? And I said, oh, they come to our house, sit in our backyard and work on exercise. And they're like, okay, that's fine. So that was I found that a completely legitimate question. Now, where they get into details like, what is this provider doing? I don't know if that's really worth it, or what. It can only be asking questions. Is it part of the waiver? Could a generic resource pay for it? Or is it integrated in the community? Those are the only 3 basic questions they're allowed to ask you. They're asking you anything else, like, what are the qualifications of this person, when they don't even need to have qualifications for that particular service? Okay. Keep going, Ed.
Thank you, Judy. The next question I have is from Unam. I'm stuck with an FMS. Harbor Regional Center vendors, FMSs, are not ready for the self-determination program and have not started becoming FMSs on the self-determination program. But Harbor Regional Center is giving their name how to get FMS.
Okay, so that's not completely true. I'm on the regional center page for Harbor, and they include FMSs like Acumen and Aviana and GT and Maincell, as well as others that are less active in the self-determination program. But those are for sure at ARC-C, I don't even know how to say their name, ARC Center. I know they've been very active FMSs. So, you should definitely, you should be able to find an FMS that knows what they're doing. Your regional center should not be telling you which one. You should be calling through all of them and interviewing them. If you're looking for the kinds of questions you should be asking them, those questions exist in our book, and those questions exist on the DDS website. So you should definitely be asking them questions. Go ahead, Ed.
Thank you for that, Judy. Sorry, I just had to grab my laptop charger so that it doesn't die in the final 7 minutes of SDP Connect.
Yes.
So I have another anonymous question. I am being told by Regional Center that fair hearing decisions may increase your budget, but the spending plan is mandated to spend that amount on the traditional service won at hearing.
That is not true. That is just absolutely not true. And they're making poop up. I will not say the dirty word, but they're making it up. It's like there is nothing in the self-determination law that says that the services that are funded to create your individual budget has to relate to the services you purchase in your spending plan. There's nothing in the law that says that. So regional centers may want it to be that way, but at least at this time, unless the law changes, it's just not true. It is absolutely not true.
Thank you for
I'd
that
like
one.
to know, I know that was an anonymous, but I'd like, if they wouldn't mind messaging you which regional center that is, I'd like to know.
Sure, anonymous, if you can message which regional center that was,
And we don't
if you're comfortable, I'll pass it on to Judy.
Yeah.
Okay, here's the next one. Also anonymous, a lot of anonymous questions today.
Yeah, it's interesting.
Yes, I think so. Some regional centers are authorizing only 6 months self-determination program budget for things like behavioral therapy. And they are also requiring progress reports every 6 months. This has made developing the spending plan challenging because the rest of the budget is not available until 6 months later. Do you have any suggestions or updates on that?
Yeah, we've been hearing this a lot. We discussed it a few weeks ago. It's something that I know my regional center West Side is doing, and I am really, really opposed to it. So what the regional centers are claiming is that they only, in the traditional system, authorize behavioral therapy for 6 months at a time. So why should they authorize it for a year in the self-determination program? I have asked DDS to weigh in on this. They have yet to do it. I brought it up at a meeting a month ago to DDS. I've heard nothing since. Maybe it's something that Rick and I can continue to try to get some clarity on. In the meantime, it's really important for you to move into the self-determination program. So just take the 6 months for now, and let's work on advocacy to get a change.
Great point. Great point, Judy. You get what you can now, even if you can't get everything you can. This is an evolving program, and it's really a good point. You're not alone. We've heard it before.
Thank you, Rick. Judy, our next question is once more anonymous. Can a potential participant start the process and decide at the last minute that this is not for them? And if so, will the IF still be paid for all the work they did?
You can change your mind at any time, but the IF will not be paid.
Thank you, Judy.
So, no, that's not true.
No, yeah, no,
Oh,
I don't
that's
think
not
so.
true. The IF will get paid. I'm sorry. I was using the word IF and I was thinking FMS. I'm wrong. The FMS will not get paid if they've helped you with your spending plan, but the IF could get paid. Yes.
Yes, and specifically, there are 024 funds for that first plan anyway that are separate from and not part of your budget. So, yeah, I don't think, Judy, your second answer is the correct answer.
Yes. I'm wrong. Some people have worked with an FMS and they actually cannot get paid through the 024 funds. So only the IFs can. So there's just our final questions. There's a couple questions I see that just came in Spanish that are towards the end.
Sure, I will copy and paste Griselda's real quick because she asked hers first. Folks, I'm gonna ask verbally out loud. Please don't put anything in the chat so that Lorna is gonna be able to translate this easier. It makes her job easier. Lorna, I've just popped Griselda's question in the chat. Could you please translate it out loud for us?
Yeah. Right. Go ahead, Rick.
Say again?
So what this person sits on their local advisory committee at their regional center, and the regional center, the committee said we're not going to have bylaws, but this one member of the committee is insisting they have bylaws. You as the chair of the statewide committee, what do you think?
Yeah, sorry, because I didn't hit the button for the translation into English, and so I was,
so you couldn't hear it. Sorry.
it was just silent, and I was chatting, and I was typing something else, and I wasn't paying any attention.
No worries.
Well, every local advisory committee does things differently. I hear a lot of individual sort of anecdotal complaints about the way some of the committees are run, and mostly because in some instances they're run by the regional center staff instead of by the members. I find in the 16 or 17 of the 21 committees that I have visited that those that are most productive are those that are less formal, and don't get hung up on what the rules are, for example, for speaking and for voting. And in other words, those that are very inclusive are the ones that seem to have a better relationship with regional center staff and among themselves. So, I don't know the question ultimately about whether there's the competing views about what laws apply, the open meetings laws, one of which is known as the Bagley-Keene Law or Act, whether they actually apply to to local advisory committees or not. sometimes people want bylaws because they are concerned that the rules aren't being followed, or that they're not being heard, or that there's an unequal playing field among either members of the committee or the committee itself and staff. Other people don't want bylaws because they're able to communicate effectively in an informal way. So whoever's asking that question, if they want to reach out to me, I'd be happy to provide some input. I do have contact with, at one point or another, all of the chairs of the local advisory committees, and it'd be interesting to know what's going on as it relates to that question, or what has caused that question to be asked.
Yeah, and I've heard this problem too. There's nothing in the law that says that a local advisory committee is required to have bylaws or term limits or anything like that. And so I support you, the person who said this. I support you. Push back on bylaws, push back on making things more bureaucratic. So we're going to end here. As usual, there were lots of questions we didn't get to, and we really urge you to come back next week. So next week we will be meeting again. We will be in part 2 of our discussion on the spending plan. Then I believe we will be taking 2 weeks off. I'm just looking at my calendar to confirm that. Yes. So next week we will discuss the spending plan part 2. Then we will be off on September 8th and September 15th. They are Jewish holidays, and we will not be meeting on those days. And then we will be back on September 22nd. So thank you all again. Thank you to to Rick Wood, as usual, for joining us. Thank you to our amazing Ed Herzl, and to our even more amazing interpreters, Helen in Korean and Lorna in Spanish. I don't know how you guys do it. So thank you all, and we'll see you all next week. Take care. Bye-bye.